In a household where every word of praise was reserved for the glamorous younger sister and silent efforts were sidelined, a young woman labeled as unremarkable chose to respond not with resentment, but with strategy. Over 5 years, quietly and persistently, she gathered every fragment of forgotten power, observed each celebrated mistake, and when the moment was ripe, she stepped forward not to reclaim justice for herself, but to completely overturn the hierarchy her family had long imposed. This is not merely a story of revenge, but a journey of dismantling what once seemed like an untouchable legacy, using the very perseverance and intellect that had been dismissed throughout her youth. And in the end, the one once treated as a backup plan became the one who held the fate of them all. On the stone-paved path leading to the suburban estate in Arlington, Harper Langley stood frozen like a stranger at the threshold of her own family. In the bright glow of a late afternoon sun, her parents gathered around a brand new crimson BMW, beaming with pride. "It's absolutely stunning, Lena. You deserve this after all your hard work," her mother exclaimed, fingers gliding along the car's sleek body as if caressing a dream. Lena smiled, tossing the keys into the air and catching them effortlessly, like a commercial actress performing for an audience of one. Harper, who stood on the sidelines clutching a folder, silently witnessing the same scene that had played out over 2 decades of her life. Whatever Lena wanted, Lena got no matter the cost, even if that cost was her older sister's future. Harper had spent the last 3 years working full-time while earning her bachelor's in business with honors, all in hopes of pursuing an MBA at one of the three prestigious schools that had sent her acceptance letters. But to her parents, that dream suddenly became unnecessary when they decided to transfer the scholarship fund she'd built up since childhood into a career launch gift for her younger sister, who was eagerly stepping into a marketing assistant position conveniently arranged by their father at the family company Avalon and Co. Sars. "Come on, Harper. Don't frown like that," her mother murmured, her gaze glancing over Harper's visibly clenched expression. "Lena needs a proper car for her new job. You don't need a car to study all that theoretical nonsense." Harper swallowed the same retort she had grown too weary to repeat, and instead gave a polite nod like a subordinate accepting her fate. Lena turned and smirked. "Keep trying, sis. Maybe in a few years you'll be able to afford one like mine." Her parents chuckled as if it were the most charming thing they'd ever heard. Harper bowed slightly and walked toward her old sedan, the one she'd bought after 3 years of diligently saving her salary. As she shut the door, Lena's voice still echoed. "I think white leather seats would be nice. Black is just so dull." Harper let out a soft laugh, but not out of amusement, rather because, in that moment, she knew with certainty that in just 3 months at the upcoming shareholders' meeting of Avalon and Co., the family order they had so confidently built would be turned on its head. While they laughed over Lena's favorite car, none of them realized Harper held the trump card, a game she had been quietly playing for 5 years. Harper Langley began her job at Avalon and Co. in the lowest position possible, as an internal mail clerk, nameless without expectations, and certainly without recognition. She was only 19 then, fresh out of high school, and while her parents celebrated her younger sister's acceptance into a prestigious university, they offered Harper nothing more than a hollow piece of advice. "Study whatever you like, just don't bother anyone." But it was in the narrow hallways of the company's West Boston headquarters, where the scent of old paperwork and printer ink blended into one, that Harper discovered an opportunity none of them could have ever foreseen. One gloomy Tuesday afternoon, while sorting mail, she came across a handwritten letter marked "Urgent," "Confidential," addressed to Richard Langley, her father, from a name she had only ever overheard in hushed company meetings: Stanford Quaid. He was the co-founder of Avalon and Koenig, who had been bought out by her father over 15 years ago after a string of financial setbacks. The letter, scrawled and worn, was unmistakably clear. Stanford was in the final stages of cancer and urgently needed to sell off a small portion of shares he had secretly held onto as a final safety net. That night, Harper sat at her old desk staring at the closing lines of the letter. If Richard isn't interested, I'll have to find someone else. But I hope the company stays in the hands of someone responsible. Harper didn't call her father. She didn't hand the letter to the executive team. Instead, she searched for Stanford's personal number, and after a phone call that lasted over an hour, something remarkable happened. He agreed to meet her. The next 6 months unfolded in complete secrecy. Every evening after work, Harper sat in a corner cafe, her old laptop open to spreadsheets, making calls to attorneys, building a financial plan, negotiating every clause. She emptied her savings from part-time jobs and added the modest inheritance left by her grandmother. Harper didn't cry when she signed the transfer papers. Stanford didn't say much either. He simply looked at her with the eyes of someone who had seen too much and said slowly, "Your father forgot that this company was built by people who started from nothing. You haven't. I believe one day you'll remind him." A month later, Harper officially became a shareholder of Avalon and Coche, holding 15% through a small holding company named Illyria Trust, unbeknownst to anyone in the company or her family. But more important than that, from that moment forward, she was no longer the forgotten daughter. She was the one holding the foundation of an empire and had begun rewriting her destiny one word at a time. Harper didn't stop at 15%. For some, that might have been a victory. But for her, it was only the opening move of a long-term strategy that no one in the family, not even Richard Langley, the man who once proudly called himself the strategic brain of Avalon and Coplica, could have possibly imagined. Over the next 4 years, she worked relentlessly within the company, while quietly monitoring every minor change in the shareholder registry. Names once closely tied to the company's early days, retired engineers, former logistics staff, even an angel investor from the startup phase, gradually stepped away from the cycle, leaving behind tiny percentages that seemed inconsequential. But Harper knew better. Winning in a family empire didn't come from public battles. It came from gathering every broken shard and assembling them into a razor-sharp spear. Each transfer agreement was executed through Illyria Trust, a Delaware-registered entity, where corporate law was streamlined to the bone. A loyal attorney she had privately retained at the age of 21, Joseph Kern, a former financial consultant, handled all the legal work, ensuring every transaction was discreet and absolutely legitimate. Sometimes Harper spent months persuading an elderly shareholder that she was the best candidate to preserve the company's founding spirit. Sometimes she offered profits, other times a simple ethical vow: "I won't let Avalon and Codas become a family playground like it is now." Every word was carefully measured, and with each new signature she stepped closer to her ultimate goal: complete control over the company that her entire family believed she was merely serving in. By day, she performed administrative tasks, supported the planning department, and learned to read financial reports, as if decoding the map of an unexplored world. By night, her small apartment overflowed with copies of board meeting minutes, growth strategies, and cash flow evaluation models. She had no time for parties, no summer vacations, no travel photos for social media like Lena. But she had something her sister would never understand: patience and a goal big enough to sacrifice everything for. By last September, Harper looked at the consolidated ownership chart in her hands and for the first time felt her blood run hot, not from anger, but from power: 51%. She was the majority shareholder, the one who now held the fate of Avalon and Coacures in her hands. And she hadn't told a single soul. Because what was about to happen had to occur at the right moment in the right place, and with just the right level of drama to change everything forever. Harper didn't have to do anything. Lena single-handedly unraveled everything. From the very first day she stepped into her role as director of marketing, a title their father had concocted to sound impressive, Lena revealed a startling naivety about how a real business functioned. She showed up in a pastel civet suit, sat in a custom-made office chair, and carried herself as though she were commanding a fashion runway, rather than leading a key department of the company. Harper stationed in her small third-floor office walls still plastered with operational flowcharts, cash flow reports, and HR restructuring plans silently monitored the internal memos delivered each morning. Lena ordered a rebrand simply because the old logo lacked personality. She signed a marketing contract with a startup run by her fresh-out-of-college boyfriend in exchange for a boldly feminist photo shoot for social media. No market research, no ROI analysis, just whims. Harper understood all too well the consequences of such reckless decisions. Within the first month, the marketing budget had already exceeded by 43%. Team meetings became Lena's personal performances, while longtime staff, those who had stood by Avalon and Co. as for decades, started handing in their resignations one by one. Jessica, the head of marketing who had steered Avalon and Cohen's through the 2016 PR crisis, was publicly called outdated and uncreative by Lena simply for suggesting budget cuts. Sarah, a rare friend, and Harper's longtime ally in the accounting department, walked into Harper's office one morning, her face tight with anger. "Jessica's been crying all morning. Lena told her she doesn't understand modern consumers, said if she couldn't adapt, she should make way for the new generation." Harper stared at the open quarterly report on her desk, her eyes darkening. Not because she hadn't foreseen this, but because it was unfolding faster than she'd anticipated. Instead of reacting with anger, she nodded, picked up her highlighter, and marked another line on her growing transition plan: protect key personnel. She knew that those being sidelined today would be the foundation of tomorrow's recovery. And she also knew her father, Richard Langley, wouldn't intervene, because to him every objection was simply jealousy of your sister's success. A shareholders' meeting had been scheduled for March, just 3 months away. Harper began laying the final bricks of her coup. Every employee reaction, every vanished budget line, every vague email from Lena Harper, archived them all. Not out of vengeance, but because she was building a case, a dossier, that when the boardroom doors finally closed, no one could deny the company was being led into the ground by those unfit to govern. The celebration for Lena's promotion took place on a Saturday evening in the highest penthouse of Beacon Hill, where the warm, golden lighting bathed champagne glasses and echoed with gleeful laughter. Harper arrived right on time as usual in a navy blue dress understated just enough to avoid her mother's comment about being off-theme, but never enough to be mistaken as an attempt to attract attention. She stood quietly by the buffet table observing as Lena entered the room, cloaked in the glitz of someone who had just been recognized for her capabilities, despite the entire company knowing she'd never completed a single day of professional training. "I pitched the idea for a cross-platform media campaign," Lena excitedly told a circle of guests, all familiar faces from their father's network, "and my dad completely supported it. I think it's the strategic move Avalon and Cohen needs to transition into a new era." Harper sipped her wine without a word. Just days earlier, she had read a report revealing that the very campaign had cost the company a nearly $2 million contract with a longtime client, someone who felt disregarded for not being consulted beforehand. But Harper hadn't come to expose anything tonight. Not yet. She came to confirm that Lena truly believed she was the center of it all. And once that belief was big enough, the fall would hurt just right. On the way home, a text from Lena popped up on Harper's screen. "Thanks for coming. It's good, I guess, for someone in the family to finally witness success." Harper smiled faintly, not in anger. She was far beyond being shaken by condescension, because in just 1 week, the internal board meeting would take place. And for the first time, the proxy votes would be counted, votes Harper had patiently accumulated over 5 years. Her father didn't know that half the board seats had already quietly shifted toward the woman in the shadows. That very night, Harper sent the final updates to her lawyer, Joseph Kern, including the list of executive positions marked for immediate replacement post-transition. Every step had been accounted for, no loose ends. On Lena's calendar the following week, held a key event representing Avalon and Coter at the International Investment Conference in New York. Their father called it a stage to showcase real leadership. Harper merely nodded, but in her mind, the vision was crystal clear. That would be Lena's final performance, the stage on which she would, with her own hands, pull down the curtain of illusion their family had painted for years. And exactly 1 week later, the curtain would fall. Not because Harper tore it down, but because Lena would collapse it herself with all the arrogance she so proudly wore. That morning, Harper woke up earlier than usual. She brewed a pot of tea instead of coffee, wore a crisp white blouse ironed the night before, and arrived at the office even earlier than the security guard. The investment conference in New York had concluded less than 10 hours prior, and its aftermath had already made waves across national business news channels, under the sensational headline, "Young Leader or PR Disaster." A photo of Lena in a striking red dress standing awkwardly alone on stage filled the screen, captioned with the fact that Avalon and Cohen's stock price had dropped nearly 15% within an hour of her speech. As Harper reread every line of the transcript cut from the conference video, a message from Sarah popped up. "Your father just called an emergency board meeting. Looks like they're panicking." Harper didn't reply right away. She calmly opened her desk drawer, took out the sealed restructuring plan, and placed it in a black leather folder alongside a 100-page report. Everything was ready. As she walked down the hallway, the atmosphere in the office felt different. Employees passing her nodded more respectfully than usual. A few even said, "Have a good day, Ms. Langley," the way they spoke to executive board members, not to someone merely labeled as a strategy officer. Inside the boardroom, most members were already seated, only Richard and Lena were missing. Harper chose a seat at the end of the table, unassuming but close enough to influence the room's dynamic. In her hands was the latest analysis of contract losses, budget overruns, and the list of senior staff who had resigned over the past 3 quarters. Every number came with a verified source, and every word was indisputable. At exactly 9:03 a.m., the doors swung open. Richard Langley walked in with a heavy stride, his face stripped of its usual confidence. Lena followed behind, head-lowered, phone in hand, but clearly lost in her own world. She was no longer the fresh face of leadership as the press had dubbed her 2 weeks earlier. Now she was the face of a system in collapse. Richard began with a familiar line: "We need unity to get through this crisis." But before he could continue, a board member, Mr. Beckley, spoke up. "I propose we reevaluate the current executive leadership. The instability is undeniable." Harper said nothing. She simply placed her folder on the table and opened to the first page. Her name stood clearly at the top: Harper Langley, majority shareholder. The entire room fell silent, as if holding its breath. Richard turned pale. Lena looked at her father and whispered, "What is this?" But there was no time to understand. In that moment, the old order had fractured, and Harper, once seen as an afterthought, was now seated squarely in the seat of power. The official shareholder meeting took place the following morning in the large glass-walled room on the 17th floor, the very space where Richard Langley had led strategic meetings for over 20 years. But today, he wasn't sitting in the center seat. The front row, reserved for board members who had long been accustomed to nodding along with his every decision, were now flipping through the report Harper had prepared: every chart, every figure, every piece of evidence detailing budget abuse and poor management, laid out with the precision of a wound that could no longer be hidden. Behind them sat the shareholders, and further back, the press waited. Harper stepped up to the podium as the clock struck 9:00. Her gaze did not falter but stood steady, every moment from the past 5 years, condensed into this single point in time. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice firm enough to carry to the back of the room but never harsh. "I will not speak of emotions. I will speak of facts. Of the 18% decline in profits over the past 2 quarters. Of the senior staff who have resigned because they no longer believe in the direction of this company. And of the consequences of a leadership model built on relationships instead of merit." Lena stood abruptly ready to object, but a single glance from Mr. Beckley was enough to make her sit back down in silence. Harper continued unflinching, unembellished. She displayed a detailed breakdown of the irrational expenses for Lena's new office, the failed PR contract that caused a longtime client to walk away, and internal emails from employees expressing confusion and concern over the current leadership. Then she paused and turned to the final page. I am currently the majority shareholder, she stated, holding 51% of the valid shares, and I hereby present to the board a motion to restructure our executive leadership, specifically the position of CEO. The room was so silent you could hear a pen drop. Richard lowered his head for the first time, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The vote followed swiftly, and the outcome did not surprise Harper. 7 votes in favor, 2 against Richard and Lena. She nodded as the results were announced, without smiling, without raising a triumphant hand. For Harper, this was not revenge. This was the restoration of the order the company had long since lost. When an older shareholder stood up and asked, "So what roles will Mr. Richard Langley and Ms. Lena play in the new structure?" Harper replied calmly, "They will be considered like any other employee based on experience, capability, and performance." Lena flushed red. Richard remained silent, and the entire room seemed to bear witness to the fall of an empire not through fire, but through truth. 1 week after that historic board meeting, the name Harper Langley appeared on the cover of the region's leading business magazine with the headline, "The Quiet Woman Who Saved an Empire." She didn't give interviews. She didn't post on social media. She said nothing about her family. She just worked from early morning until late into the night, not for image, but for responsibility. Her first decisions were defining reinstating all former management staff who had been fired or resigned during Lena's tenure, starting with Jessica, the one publicly humiliated for being not modern enough. On the day Jessica returned to the marketing department, she cried upon seeing her desk untouched, with a note from Harper that read simply, "We need you." The returning employees brought back loyalty and professionalism, while every new hire went through a transparent recruitment process, no exceptions. A scholarship program called Future Builders was launched after a closed-door meeting between Harper and the HR department. Each year, 10 full scholarships would be awarded to children of employees who demonstrated academic excellence and resilience, because Harper believed talent should never be stifled by circumstance. When her mother heard the news, she only shook her head and called it a foolish waste. But Harper didn't respond. She knew her mother had never believed a woman could lead a company and uphold human values at the same time. She no longer needed that approval. Rumors that Lena was trying to get an internal job spread like wildfire. Sarah, now head of HR, sent Harper an application file. Applicant name, Lena Langley. Position, junior accounting associate. Experience virtually blank, except for a few months as marketing director that the press had harshly criticized. Harper skimmed the file, set it down, and said calmly, "Process her like any other candidate." A few days later, the automated system sent a rejection email along with a suggestion for supplemental courses the company had partnered with a local community college to provide. That same afternoon, Lena posted a flurry of Instagram stories, crying, venting, accusing her sister of betrayal. Harper didn't watch, didn't reply. She was busy approving the expansion plan into the Northwest market. Richard, the father who once ruled every decision, was now unemployed. When he quietly requested a meeting, Harper agreed to see him in the old boardroom. "I have decades of experience," he said. "I can advise you, support you." Harper silently pulled out the latest quarterly report, pointing to the figures showing a 22% increase in profits since he stepped down as CEO. "I don't need an advisor," she said slowly. "I need someone willing to start from the beginning. If you're ready to learn, I'm willing to open the door." It wasn't cruelty. It was principle. And in the era of Harper Langley, principle was the one thing that would never be compromised. 3 months after officially assuming the role of CEO, Harper stood in the grand lobby of Avalon Encoder's headquarters, quietly gazing up at the newly mounted portrait placed beside the photograph of her grandfather, the company's founder, with eyes that shone and lips pressed tight as if always envisioning something beyond. Beside it was a picture of her taken during the historic shareholder meeting holding a stack of documents, her expression not of victory, but of responsibility. Sarah stood next to her, smiling gently. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. Harper nodded. "Not because I'm his granddaughter," she replied, "but because I've upheld the values he left behind: fairness, professionalism, and no tolerance for incompetence." The atmosphere in the company had completely transformed. Meetings now revolved around efficiency, creativity, and strategy. Employees no longer feared being overlooked for lacking family ties. Instead, they were evaluated on merit, and every contribution was acknowledged. Harper didn't need to preach company culture, she let her actions speak. One afternoon, Jared, a former executive from a partner firm, walked into her office with new proposals and a respectful tone. "We want to renew our contract with Avalon & Co. It's been a long time since I've seen a team this professional," he said. Harper shook his hand, offering no lengthy thanks. For her, a partner's trust was the highest affirmation. At the same moment, a letter from the Future Builders Scholarship Program landed on her desk, the list of 10 new recipients, children of employees from logistics, tech, and accounting departments. Harper read each name and smiled at one girl, 17 years old, described as the neighborhood go-to for computer repairs. She wrote a note by hand. "Give her the opportunity. She is who I used to be." That evening, as Harper was preparing to leave the office, she saw her mother in the hallway holding an old photo, a snapshot of Harper at 14 sitting beside a computer she had built from salvaged parts. "I remember you staying up until 3 a.m., reinstalling the system on that old thing," her mother said, her voice softer than usual. Harper didn't respond. Her mother stepped forward and gently placed the photo on her desk. "Back then I thought you were wasting time, but now I understand. Not everyone needs to be given a chance. Some people create it for themselves." Harper nodded without resentment. She knew recognition, even when late, still mattered. As she exited the building, she passed by the HR office and happened to glance at a new application. Applicant name: Lena Langley, position intern for the Financial Skills Development Program. No more director title, no more social media posts with justifications. Just a plain application submitted on time with a sincere cover letter. Harper didn't smile in triumph. She simply wrote one line on the file: "If qualified, schedule an interview like any other candidate." Then she walked away without looking back. Because her legacy didn't lie in what she had dismantled, but in what she was building every single day with her own two hands. In a world where the loudest voices often drown out real capability, Harper Langley proved that persistence, clarity, and strategy will always have the final say. She didn't need to retaliate, didn't need revenge, only results. And those results reshaped an entire company, an entire family, and the very way people perceive personal worth. She didn't reclaim justice, she redefined it one step at a time. If you've ever been underestimated, ever pushed aside for not fitting someone's vision, then this story is for you. Follow our channel so you don't miss powerful, profound journeys like Harper's, where silence isn't surrender, but the time it takes to build an unshakable rise. Subscribe now because the untold stories are still waiting for you.